My name is Totalbiscuit, and I suck at Starcraft 2. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of I Suck at Starcraft 2, and oh god, is it still true. So this is the final match of my placements, and it's against a fellow by the name of Droon. It's on a new map called the Zelnaga Caverns, which I'm going to give you a look at in just a short moment. So up until this point, I've won 2, and I've lost 2, and I'd like to say those losses were suitably epic, and very entertaining, and really informative. But I'm afraid one was a 6-bull that I was too stupid to counter, and the other was my crossfire cards bugging out and making half my units disappear through the map. A bug which is inexplicably still in the game after 3 months of testing. Whatever the case, what I'm trying to do here is learn exactly when to place the first pylon. I don't know what it is. I think a lot of people have this issue. They know exactly what they're supposed to do, but when it comes down to actually doing it, they screw it up. So, I do get the pylon out right there, and my supply block isn't quite as bad as before. In fact, I think my timing was almost right. My opponent, on the other hand, is not walling himself off, which is a little odd, I must say. It's always advisable to do that against the Protoss or the Zerg, honestly. There's no reason not to. Even if it never ever contributes to your defense at any point. Maybe the Protoss player doesn't even attack until he has all ranged units, so your block is effectively useless. What if he goes in early with Zealots? What if he goes in early with Zerglings? You can stop it very simply by using a barracks and 2 supply depots to block off that entrance, and it's very easy to either take the barracks off or make the supply depots go into the ground so that you can easily walk past. I'm starting off with a fairly standard setup. Or I was. I'd like to explain the rationale behind this, but there isn't one. What you could do in this situation, if you were to, say, go mad and build a forge right there, is to go into a cannon-based fast expansion, which means that you build a nexus very early and you rely on cannons to defend your natural expansion, which you can see there at the top of the mini-map. It can work, and it's really map-dependent. Some maps are really good for it, like, say, Steps of War. That's got a ramp that goes up to your natural expansion, then another ramp, and you can easily block off that second ramp with cannons, go for the fast expansion, and get an early resource advantage. Now, I was having a scout around here, and this is about the right time to look. What I noticed is 2 refineries and a single barracks with an early tech lab right there. That can mean a few things. But honestly, what it would have been safe to assume is that my opponent was going to try it on with Reapers, and this is a reasonable map for it. You can see the large cliff face all the way around my base that could be easily accessible by anything with jump jets. Of course, I wasn't really paying attention. I thought, hey, all that means is he's going to go loads of Marauders. He's going to just pump the Marauders out, and that's a good strategy early game against the Protoss. Pump the Marauders out as quickly as possible, but with a single barracks and single tech lab, not really worthwhile. You can't pump out enough, honestly, to be all that effective. No, he's sending in a single Reaper, and that Reaper is going to wreak havoc. However, he does make a fatal mistake. He's able to exploit my lack of defense there, which is great. I mean, it was dumb of me not to build cannons as soon as I got that forge up. And I've got a couple at the front there, but near my mineral line? No, not at all. A single photon cannon would have shut this down, but as it turns out, I'm going to lose quite a few of those probes in the meantime. I end up bottlenecking my own probes there, creating a shooting gallery, and what I should have done is micromanage my zealots around the side there. I was able to eventually take him out, but that was an absolutely stupid economic loss. However, he could have done so very much more if he'd been a little bit patient and waited for a second Reaper. Now, he's gone for a factory very early there, so there's a couple of options. He could be pumping out his Hellions nice and early, going in there and doing some damage with it. Right now, against my force, well, that's not going to work too well. He's going to run straight into a cannon, and Hellions don't fare too well there. Against Zealots, on the other hand, that's a great idea. However, he'll have seen that I've got a Cybernetics core, so he knows that I have Stalkers available, which will shred Hellions, no problem at all. At least I would have Stalkers available if I hadn't supply blocked myself. I'm going for a very early +1 upgrade here, and I'd like to explain why, but there is no good reason for it. I mean, a +1 upgrade early on against, say, a Zergling heavy force with my Zealots. What that allows them to do is it allows me to kill a Zergling in 2 hits instead of 3, so that's a big deal. In this case, while it's nice, it is a waste of Vespene gas early on. I should have spent it on more Stalkers. Maybe a couple of sentries to make things good. Now, I need to go and have another look at his base to figure out exactly what to do. I've got a pylon going up there, and I can then stick a cannon at the rear to ensure that he doesn't hit me with Reapers again. So it turns out I charged my Zealots headlong into a bunker full of death, so that didn't work out so well. At least I know that he's got good frontal defense, and he's fairly heavy on Marines. My solution to that is pop out a couple of sentries so that I can absorb a lot of that Gauss rifle fire. See what I can do with a bunch of Stalkers and try and push my way in there. Maybe get Stalker Blink, head on over there. I mean, right now I'm in a position where I could go in a variety of different directions, so at least I've got a little bit of flexibility, and I've got plenty of resources, so I'm dumping down 3 gateways, and I'm going to upgrade them all to warp gates as soon as they're up there. That gives me the ability to summon in 4 units at a time at a fairly rapid rate, so I can respond to whatever he throws at me, or so I believe. In the meantime, I'm pumping out Twilight Council. My thought is, if he goes Heavy Marauder, then I want to try and get Zealot Charge so that I can get in there early, and also Stalker Blink would be handy. But as it turns out, he decided to go Thors instead. If I'd scouted the armory at the rear, then I could have seen that coming a mile away, but I didn't. And that could be a critical mistake on my part. Little expeditionary force there, Marines, having a look around, seeing what they can see. You'll notice there that I've chrono boosted my warp gate. That actually does work. It speeds up the cooldown of the unit summoning, so that was something I didn't actually know previously, and that's a handy little tip. There we go. I can upgrade all of those to warp gates, and then I can summon in 4 units at a time. In the meantime, however, he does have a Thor on its way with a little bit of a Marine escort. Here's the thing, if you're going to push early game with Thors, what you should be doing is at least escorting them with a few SCVs. A Thor push backed up by units that can fix it, bearing in mind the size and the footprint of that unit, you can get a lot of SCVs around it. Not only do they soak up a little bit of the fire, say if you're auto-attacking, then what'll happen is your units are going to attack the SCVs first as a priority. That's just the way their AI works. So they can soak up a little bit of fire, and they can keep the Thor alive much longer. So it can be far more effective. Now, of course, I massacre the Marines and then get gunned down by this thing. 3 shots is all it takes to take down a Stalker, and that's with no weapon upgrades on the Thor's end at all. Thor's taking a lot of damage, and again, this is something he could have prevented simply by sending a few SCVs in there. He could have pushed an awful lot harder. Now, he's taking quite a bit of fire from my photon cannons there, so that's not too good. He's having to back off. I managed to warp in 3 more Zealots, but it was such a waste of resources on my part. I just threw everything I could at him. Now, thankfully, I've just built 2 robotics facilities. I like to say this was some kind of master plan. It's like, hey, this is my tech switch, and I saw it coming ahead of time, and I scouted it, and I'm great. But no, it was actually more due to the fact that I wanted to build a lot of Immortals, because they're neat. Whatever the case, this is going to serve me quite well, because his strategy right here is to pump out Thors and hope for the best, and back them up with Marines. Okay, that's fine, but again, no SCVs to fix up his Thors. Now, 2 Thors is a formidable force, but those things move quite slowly, and by the looks of it, I'm going to have an Immortal out in the meantime. Now, why is an Immortal such a good counter to a Thor? Well, the answer to that is simple. It's called Hardened Shields. Hardened Shields is a passive ability that means that any fire that's coming in that does over 10 damage is reduced to 10. So, things that have big anti-armor cannons like Thors and siege tanks are rendered almost worthless against an Immortal, and we're about to find out. But that's not all. They also mount dual particle disruptor cannons, which are extremely powerful against armor. You can see it punching massive holes there in the Thor. Actually warped in one of my Stalkers there, which didn't work out so well, as you can see. I should have just let the Immortal handle it. I must point out that any mention of the term hard counter within the context of Starcraft 2 should always be taken with a pinch of salt. There technically are no hard counters. For instance, a Immortal versus 2 Thors would die. It's as simple as that. Now, my opponent's fatal mistake from here on in is simply this: tactical inflexibility. He invested heavily early game into getting the technology to get Thors out of the gate. So what does he do? He keeps building them. Now, that's the fatal mistake, because now I have a hard counter, and StarCraft 2 isn't really a game about hard counters. It's mostly a case of, hey, this unit will do better against this one, but it's not going to be a case of this unit will wipe out 50 of these. That just doesn't happen. In this case, though, I have 4 Immortals, he has a Thor and a few Marines, and they are going to last, I'll give him about 5 seconds under the withering fire of those particle cannons. Let's get a good shot on it right there. There we go. I even managed to block in most of my Immortals right there, which was extremely dumb. Should have just moved them down the ramp, but there you go. Now, at this point, what you should have done is stopped. Stop building the Thors entirely. It's problematic against Protoss, really, because you've invested very heavily into a factory with a tech lab and into an armory, and you've been pumping a lot of your Vespene gas and a lot of your resources into bringing out Thors. What are you going to switch to in this situation, especially if you only have a single barracks? Well, there's a few counters to it, and one of the good ones is actually just to ball up a large number of Marines and Marauders with stim packs. Marauders don't do too well against Immortals, but they do far better than a Thor would. They don't die as quickly, and with stim packs they actually fire so fast that the Immortal shields can be quickly overwhelmed. Now, he is building a starport, so here comes his switch. The problem is, it's a little bit too late, because I decided to build a Warp Prism, and I brought 2 Immortals with me. The nice thing about a Warp Prism is that you can use the Warp Gates to bring in units off of the Warp Prism when it deploys. However, my opponent is smart, and he kills the Warp Prism first before focusing fire on the Immortals. The Immortal is torn apart by a combined force of Marines and those Thors. However, I've got more in the wings. I've got 4 Zealots in that Warp Prism and another 2 Immortals. Now, with 2 Warp Prisms, my hope is simply that I'll be able to deploy both, and even if he takes out one, my Immortals and my Zealots will be able to deal with those Thors. Anti-air fire coming in from the Thors is not enough. Not yet, anyway. Able to deploy everything, and there you see, got the Warp Prism out of the back, and I can now warp into range of it. Able to take his Thor out, he has no defense, and that, as they say, is that. His attempted switch over to Starport happened a little bit too late, and he wasn't able to get out anything whatsoever to deal with those Immortals. Now, from a Terran standpoint, if you're going to be pushing Thors like that, obviously use the SCVs, like I mentioned earlier, but always have a backup plan. Bear in mind, if you're playing Terran versus Protoss, and you use a build similar to this guy, you become reliant on mechanized units, i.e. the Thor and the Siege Tank. I've got a counter to that. Immortals can come out, and then you've got to think about, what are you going to do if those Immortals arrive? What have you got as an alternative? Well, you've got a barracks with a tech lab, so you're going to produce, what, Marauders at a very slow rate? That's not going to work, because I've got too many Zealots coming out, and I can bring out Zealots faster than you. The simple fact of the matter is, barracks are cheap, and barracks can pump out plenty of very effective units with no tech requirements whatsoever. In this case, more barracks, more Marines would have served him very well indeed. I'd also like to point out that neither of us really did too well on our so-called macro management there. The easy way to describe macro management would be how well and how quickly you end up building units. In this case, I have a load of resources at various points in the game which I simply do not use. I mean, right there, I've got over 1,000 resources. I could have been spending them. I could make the excuse that say, oh, well, I was going to deploy them on the Warp Prism, but even then, I was going to drop in 4 Zealots, and I've still had tons and tons of resources left. I should have teched, I should have expanded earlier, just in case my opponent was actually able to counteract me. As it turns out, he wasn't, and that was okay, but that does not mean it's alright to simply sit on a pile of resources and do nothing with them. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Totalbiscuit, and I still suck at Starcraft 2. I'll see you next time.